Mystery Club. Chapter 1. Joyce. Well, let's start with Elizabeth, shall we? And see where that gets us? I knew who she was, of course, everybody here knows Elizabeth. She has one of the 3-bed flats in Larkin Court. It's the one on the corner, with the decking. Also, I was once on a quiz team with Stephen, who, for a number of reasons, is Elizabeth's third husband. I was at lunch, this is 2 or 3 months ago, and it must have been a Monday, because it was shepherd's pie. Elizabeth said she could see that I was eating, but wanted to ask me a question about knife wounds, if it wasn't inconvenient. I said, not at all, of course, please, or words to that effect. I won't always remember everything exactly, I might as well tell you that now. So she opened a manila folder, and I saw some typed sheets and the edges of what looked like old photographs. Then she was straight into it. Elizabeth asked me to imagine that a girl had been stabbed with a knife. I asked what sort of knife she had been stabbed with, and Elizabeth said probably just a normal kitchen knife. John Lewis. She didn't say that, but that was what I pictured. Then she asked me to imagine this girl had been stabbed, 3 or 4 times, just under the breastbone. In and out, very nasty, but without severing an artery. She was fairly quiet about the whole thing, because people were eating, and she does have some boundaries. So there I was, imagining stab wounds, and Elizabeth asked me how long it would take the girl to bleed to death. By the way, I realize I should have mentioned that I was a nurse for many years, otherwise none of this will make sense to you. Elizabeth would have known that from somewhere, because Elizabeth knows everything. Anyway, that's why she was asking me. You must have wondered what I was on about. I will get the hang of writing this, I promise. I remember dabbing at my mouth before I answered, like you see on television sometimes. It makes you look cleverer, try it? I asked what the girl had weighed. Elizabeth found the information in her folder, followed her finger and read out that the girl had been 46 kilos. Which threw us both, because neither of us was sure what 46 kilos was in real money. In my head I was thinking it must be about 23 stone. 2 to 1 was my thinking. Even as I thought that, though, I suspected I was getting mixed up with inches and centimeters. Elizabeth let me know the girl definitely wasn't 23 stone, as she had a picture of her corpse in the folder. She tapped the folder at me, before turning her attention back to the room, and said, "Will somebody ask Bernard what 46 kilos is?" Bernard always sits by himself, on one of the smaller tables nearest the patio. It is table 8. You don't need to know that, but I will tell you a bit about Bernard. Bernard Cottle was very kind to me when I first arrived at Cooper's Chase. He brought me a clematis cutting and explained the recycling timetable. They have 4 different colored bins here. 4. Thanks to Bernard, I know that green is for glass, and blue is cardboard and paper. As for red and black, though, your guess is still as good as mine. I've seen all sorts as I've wandered about. Someone once put a fax machine in one. Bernard had been a professor, something in science, and had worked all around the world, including going to Dubai before anyone had heard of it. True to form, he was wearing a suit and tie to lunch, but was, nevertheless, reading the Daily Express. Mary from Ruskin Court, who was at the next table, got his attention and asked how much 46 kilos was when it was at home. Bernard nodded and called over to Elizabeth, 7 stone 3 and a bit. And that's Bernard for you. Elizabeth thanked him and said that sounded about right, and Bernard returned to his crossword. I looked up centimeters and inches afterwards, and at least I was right about that. Elizabeth went back to her question. How long would the girl stabbed with the kitchen knife have to live? I guessed that, unattended, she would probably die in around 45 minutes. Well, quite, Joyce, she said, and then had another question. What if the girl had had medical assistance? Not a doctor, but someone who could patch up a wound. Someone who'd been in the army, perhaps. Someone like that. I have seen a lot of stab wounds in my time. My job wasn't all sprained ankles. So I said then, well, she wouldn't die at all. Which she wouldn't. It wouldn't have been fun for her, but it would have been easy to patch up. Elizabeth was nodding away, and said that was precisely what she had told Ibrahim, although I didn't know Ibrahim at that time. As I say, this was a couple of months ago. It hadn't seemed at all right to Elizabeth, and her view was that the boyfriend had killed her. I know this is still often the case. You read about it? I think before I moved in I might have found this whole conversation unusual, but it is pretty par for the course once you get to know everyone here. Last week I met the man who invented mint choc chip ice cream, or so he tells it. I don't really have any way of checking. I was glad to have helped Elizabeth in my small way, so decided I might ask a favor. I asked if there was any way I could take a look at the picture of the corpse. Just out of professional interest. Elizabeth beamed, the way people around here beam when you ask to look at pictures of their grandchildren graduating. She slipped an A4 photocopy out of her folder, laid it, face down, in front of me and told me to keep it, as they all had copies. I told her that was very kind of her, and she said not at all, but she wondered if she could ask me one final question. Of course, I said. Then she said, are you ever free on Thursdays? And, that, believe it or not, was the first I had heard of Thursdays. Chapter 2. PC Donna de Freitas would like to have a gun. She would like to be chasing serial killers into abandoned warehouses, grimly getting the job done, despite a fresh bullet wound in her shoulder. Perhaps developing a taste for whiskey and having an affair with her partner. But for now, 26 years old, and sitting down for lunch at 11:45 in the morning, with 4 pensioners she has only just met, Donna understands that she will have to work her way up to all that. And besides, she has to admit that the last hour or so has been rather fun. Donna has given her talk practical tips for home security many times. And today there was the usual audience of older people, blankets across knees, free biscuits, and a few happy snoozers at the back. She gives the same advice each time. The absolute, paramount importance of installing window locks, checking ID cards and never giving out personal information to cold callers. More than anything, she is supposed to be a reassuring presence in a terrifying world. Donna understands that, and it also gets her out of both the station and paperwork, so she volunteers. Fairhaven Police Station is sleepier than Donna is used to. Today, however, she had found herself at Cooper's Chase Retirement Village. It seemed innocuous enough. Lush, untroubled, sedate, and on her drive-in she had spotted a nice pub for lunch on the way home. So getting serial killers in headlocks on speedboats would have to wait. Security, Donna had begun, though she was really thinking about whether she should get a tattoo. A dolphin on her lower back. Or would that be too much of a cliché? And would it be painful? Probably, but she was supposed to be a police officer, wasn't she? What do we mean when we say the word security? Well, I think that word means different things to different. A hand shot up in the front row. Which was not normally how this went, but in for a penny. An immaculately dressed woman in her 80s had a point to make. Dear, I think we're all hoping this won't be a talk about window locks. The woman looked around her, picking up murmured support. A gentleman hemmed in by a walking frame in the second row was next. And no ID cards please, we know about ID cards. Are you really from the gas board, or are you a burglar? We've got it, I promise. A free-for-all had commenced. It's not the gas board anymore. It's Centrica, said a man in a very good 3-piece suit. The man sitting next to him, wearing shorts, flip-flops and a West Ham United shirt, took this opportunity to stand up and stab a finger in no particular direction. It's thanks to Thatcher that, Ibrahim. We used to own it. Oh, do sit down, Ron, the smartly dressed woman had said. Then looked at Donna and added, sorry about Ron, with a slow shake of her head. The comments had continued to fly. And what criminal wouldn't be able to forge an ID document? I've got cataracts. You could show me a library card and I'd let you in. They don't even check the meter now. It's all on the web. It's on the cloud, dear. I'd welcome a burglar. It would be nice to have a visitor. There had been the briefest of lulls. An atonal symphony of whistles began as some hearing aids were turned up, while others were switched off. The woman in the front row had taken charge again. So, and I'm Elizabeth, by the way, no window locks, please, and no ID cards, and no need to tell us we mustn't give our PIN number to Nigerians over the phone. If I am still allowed to say Nigerians. Donna de Freitas had regrouped, but was aware she was no longer thinking about pub lunches or tattoos. Now she was thinking about a riot training course back in the good, old days in South London. Well, what shall we talk about then? Donna had asked. I have to do at least 45 minutes or I don't get the time off in lieu. Institutional sexism in the police force, said Elizabeth. I'd like to talk about the illegal shooting of Mark Duggan, sanctioned by the state and... Sit down, Ron. So it went on, enjoyably and agreeably, until the hour was up, whereupon Donna had been warmly thanked, shown pictures of grandchildren and then invited to stay for lunch. And so here she is, picking at her salad, in what the menu describes as a contemporary upscale restaurant. 11:45 is a little early for her to have lunch, but it wouldn't have been polite to refuse the invitation. She notes that her four hosts are not only tucking into full lunches, but have also cracked open a bottle of red wine. That really was wonderful, Donna, says Elizabeth. We enjoyed it tremendously. Elizabeth looks to Donna like the sort of teacher who terrifies you all year but then gets you a grade A and cries when you leave. Perhaps it's the tweed jacket. It was blinding, Donna, says Ron. Can I call you Donna, love? You can call me Donna, but maybe don't call me love, says Donna. Quite right, darling, agrees Ron. Noted. That story about the Ukrainian with the parking ticket and the chainsaw, though. You should do after dinner speaking, there's money in it. I know someone, if you'd like a number. The salad is delicious, thinks Donna, and it's not often she thinks that. I would have made a terrific heroin smuggler, I think. This was Ibrahim, who had earlier raised the point about Centrica. It's just logistics, isn't it? There's all the weighing too, which I would enjoy, very precise. And they have machines to count money. All the mod cons. Have you ever captured a heroin dealer, PC de Freitas? No, admits Donna. It's on my list, though. But I'm right that they have machines to count money, asks Ibrahim. They do, yes, says Donna. Wonderful, says Ibrahim, and downs his glass of wine. We bore easily, adds Elizabeth, also polishing off a glass. God save us from window locks, WPC de Freitas. It's just PC now, says Donna. I see, says Elizabeth, lips pursing. And what happens if I still choose to say WPC? Will there be a warrant for my arrest? No, but I'll think a bit less of you, says Donna. Because it's a really simple thing to do, and it's more respectful to me. Damn. Checkmate. Okay, says Elizabeth, and unpurses her lips. Thank you, says Donna. Guess how old I am, challenges Ibrahim. Donna hesitates. Ibrahim has a nice suit, and he has great skin. He smells wonderful. A handkerchief is artfully folded in his breast pocket. Hair thinning, but still there. No paunch, and just the one chin. And yet underneath it all? Donna looks at Ibrahim's hands. Always the giveaway. 80, she ventures. She sees the wind depart Ibrahim's sails. Yes, spot on, but I look younger. I look about 74. Everyone agrees. The secret is Pilates. And what's your story, Joyce? Asks Donna to the fourth member of the group, a small, white-haired woman in a lavender blouse and mauve cardigan. She is sitting very happily, taking it all in. Mouth closed, but eyes bright. Like a quiet bird, constantly on the lookout for something sparkling in the sunshine. Me, says Joyce. No story at all. I was a nurse, and then a mum, and then a nurse again. Nothing to see here, I'm afraid. Elizabeth gives a short snort. Don't be taken in by Joyce, P.C. DeFreitas. She is the type who gets things done. I'm just organized, says Joyce. It's out of fashion. If I say I'm going to Zumba, I go to Zumba. That's just me. My daughter is the interesting one in the family. She runs a hedge fund, if you know what one is. Not really, admits Donna. No, agrees Joyce. Zumba is before Pilates, says Ibrahim. I don't like to do both. It's counterintuitive to your major muscle groups. A question has been nagging at Donna throughout lunch. So, if you don't mind me asking, I know you all live at Cooper's Chase, but how did the four of you become friends? Friends? Elizabeth seems amused. Oh, we're not friends, dear. Ron is chuckling. Christ, love, no, we're not friends. Do you need a top-up, Liz? Elizabeth nods and Ron powers. They are on a second bottle. It is 12.15. Ibrahim agrees. I don't think friends is the word. We wouldn't choose to socialize, we have very different interests. I like Ron, I suppose, but he can be very difficult. Ron nods, I'm very difficult. And Elizabeth's manner is off-putting. Elizabeth nods, there it is, I'm afraid. I've always been an acquired taste. Since school. I like Joyce, I suppose. I think we all like Joyce, says Ibrahim. Ron and Elizabeth nod their agreement again. Thank you, I'm sure, says Joyce, chasing peas around her plate. Don't you think someone should invent flat peas? Donna tries to clear up her confusion. So if you aren't friends, then what are you? Donna sees Joyce look up and shake her head at the others, this unlikely gang. Well, says Joyce. Firstly, we are friends, of course, this lot are just a little slow catching on. And secondly, if it didn't say on your invitation, P.C. DeFreitas, then it was my oversight. We're the Thursday Murder Club. Elizabeth is going glassy-eyed with red wine, Ron is scratching at a West Ham tattoo on his neck and Ibrahim is polishing an already polished cufflink. The restaurant is filling up around them, and Donna is not the first visitor to Cooper's Chase to think this wouldn't be the worst place to live. She would kill for a glass of wine and an afternoon off. Also, I swim every day, concludes Ibrahim. It keeps the skin tight. What is this place? Chapter 3. If you are ever minded to take the A21 out of Fairhaven, and head into the heart of the Kentish Weald, you will eventually pass an old phone box, still working, on a sharp left-hand bend. Continue for around 100 yards until you see the sign for Whitechurch, Abbots Hatch, and Lents Hill, and then take a right. Head through Lents Hill, past the Blue Dragon and the little farm shop with the big egg outside, until you reach the small stone bridge over the Roberts Mere. Officially the Roberts Mere is a river, but don't get confused and expect anything grand. Take the single-track right turn just past the bridge. You will think you are headed the wrong way, but this is quicker than the way the official brochure takes you, and also picturesque if you like dappled hedgerows. Eventually the road widens out and, peeking between tall trees, you will begin to see signs of life rising on the hilly land up to your left. Up ahead you will see a tiny, wood-clad bus stop, also still working, If one bus in either direction a day counts as working. Just before you reach the bus stop you will see the entrance sign for Cooper's Chase on your left. They began work on Cooper's Chase about 10 years ago, when the Catholic Church sold the land. The first residents, Ron, for one, had moved in 3 years later. It was billed as Britain's first luxury retirement village, though according to Ibrahim, who has checked, it was actually the 7th. There are currently around 300 residents. You can't move here until you're over 65, and the Waitrose delivery vans clink with wine and repeat prescriptions every time they pass over the cattle grid. The old convent dominates Cooper's Chase, with 3 modern residential developments spiraling out from this central point. For over 100 years the convent was a hushed building, filled with the dry bustle of habits and the quiet certainty of prayers offered and answered. Tapping along its dark corridors you would have found some women comfortable in their serenity, some women frightened of a speeding world, some women hiding, some women proving a vague, long-forgotten point, and some women taking joy in serving a higher purpose. You would have found single beds, arranged in dorms, long, low tables for eating, a chapel so dark and quiet you would swear you heard God breathing. In short, you would find the Sisters of the Holy Church, an army which would never give you up, which would feed you and clothe you and continue to need and value you. All it required in return was a lifetime of devotion, and, given there will always be someone requiring that, there were always volunteers. And then one day you would take the short trip up the hill, through the tunnel of trees, to the Garden of Eternal Rest, the iron gates and low stone walls of the garden looking over the convent and the endless beauty of the Kentish high weald beyond, your body in another single bed, under a simple stone, alongside the Sister Margarets and Sister Marys of the generations before you. If you had once had dreams they could now play over the green hills, and if you had secrets then they were kept safe inside the 4 walls of the convent forever. Well, more accurately, 3 walls, as the west-facing side of the convent is now entirely glazed to accommodate the residents' swimming pool complex. It looks out over the bowling green, and then further down to the visitors' car park, the permits for which are rationed to such an extent that the parking committee is the single most powerful cabal within Cooper's Chase. Beside the swimming pool is a small arthritis therapy pool, which looks like a jacuzzi, largely for the reason that it is a jacuzzi. Anyone given the grand tour by the owner, Ian Ventham, would then be shown the sauna. Ian would always open the door a crack and say, "Blimey, it's like a sauna in there." That was Ian. Take the lift up to the recreation rooms next. The gym, and the exercise studio, where residents could happily Zumba among the ghosts of the single beds. Then there's the jigsaw room for gentler activities and associations. There's the library, and the lounge for the bigger and more controversial committee meetings, or for football on the flat-screen TV. Then down again to the ground floor, where the long low tables of the convent refectory are now the contemporary upscale restaurant. At the very heart of the village, attached to the convent, is the original chapel. Its pale cream stucco exterior makes it look almost Mediterranean against the fierce, Gothic darkness of the convent. The chapel remains intact and unchanged, one of the few covenants insisted upon by the executors of the Sisters of the Holy Church when they had sold out 10 years ago. The residents like to use the chapel. This is where the ghosts are, where the habits still bustle and where the whispers have sunk into the stone. It is a place to make you feel part of something slower and something gentler. Ian Ventham is looking into contractual loopholes that might allow him to redevelop the chapel into 8 more flats. Attached to the other side of the convent, the very reason for the convent, is Willows. Willows is now the nursing home for the village. It had been established by the sisters in 1841 as a voluntary hospital, charitably tending to the sick and broken when no other option existed. In the latter part of the last century it had become a care home, until legislation in the 1980s led to the doors finally closing. The convent then simply became a waiting room, and when the last nun passed away in 2005, the church wasted no time in cashing in and selling it as a job lot. The development sits in 12 acres of woodland and beautiful open hillside. There are 2 small lakes, one real, and one created by Ian Bentham's builder, Tony Curran, and his gang. The many ducks and geese that also call Cooper's Chase home seem to much prefer the artificial one. There are still sheep farmed at the very top of the hill, where the woodland breaks, and in the pastures by the lake is a herd of 20 llamas. Ian Bentham had bought 2 to look quirky in sales photos, and it had got out of hand, as these things do. That, in a nutshell, is what this place is. Chapter 4. Joyce. I first kept a diary many years ago, but I've looked back at it, and I don't think it would be of any interest to you. Unless you're interested in Haywards Heath in the 1970s, which I am going to assume you're not. That is no offense to either Haywards Heath or the 1970s, both of which I enjoyed at the time. But a couple of days ago, after meeting Elizabeth, I went to my first ever meeting of the Thursday Murder Club, and I have been thinking that perhaps it might be interesting to write about. Like whoever wrote that diary about Holmes and Watson. People love a murder, whatever they might say in public, so I will give it a go. I knew the Thursday Murder Club was going to be Elizabeth, Ibrahim Arif, who lives in Wordsworth, with a wraparound balcony, and Ron Ritchie. Yes, that Ron Ritchie. So that was something else exciting. Now I know him a bit better, the shine has worn off a little, but even so. Penny Gray also used to be part of it, but she is now in Willows, that's the nursing home. Thinking about it now, I fitted right in. I suppose there had been a vacancy, and I was the new Penny. I was nervous at the time, though. I remember that. I took along a nice bottle of wine, £8.99, to give you an idea, and as I walked in, the 3 of them were already there in the jigsaw room, laying out photographs on the table. Elizabeth had formed the Thursday Murder Club with Penny. Penny had been an inspector in the Kent police for many years, and she would bring along the files of unsolved murder cases. She wasn't really supposed to have the files, but who was to know? After a certain age, you can pretty much do whatever takes your fancy. No one tells you off, except for your doctors and your children. I'm not supposed to say what Elizabeth used to do for a living, even though she does go on about it herself at times. Suffice to say though, that murders and investigations and what have you wouldn't be unfamiliar work for her. Elizabeth and Penny would go through every file, line by line, study every photograph, read every witness statement, just looking for anything that had been missed. They didn't like to think there were guilty people still happily going about their business. Sitting in their gardens, doing a Sudoku, knowing they had got away with murder. Also, I think that Penny and Elizabeth just thoroughly enjoyed it. A few glasses of wine and a mystery. Very social, but also gory. It is good fun. They would meet every Thursday, that's how they came up with the name. It was Thursday because there was a 2-hour slot free in the jigsaw room, between art history and conversational French. It was booked, and still is booked, under the name Japanese Opera, a discussion, which ensured they were always left in peace. There were certain favors both of them could call upon, for different reasons, and all sorts of people had been called in for a friendly chat over the years. Forensics officers, accountants and judges, tree surgeons, horse breeders, glass blowers, they'd all been to the jigsaw room. Whomever Elizabeth and Penny thought might help them with some query or other. Ibrahim had soon joined them. He used to play bridge with Penny, and had helped them out once or twice with bits and bobs. He's a psychiatrist. Or was a psychiatrist. Or still is, I'm not quite sure. When you first meet him you can't see that at all, but once you get to know him it makes a sort of sense. I would never have therapy, because who wants to unravel all that knitting? Not worth the risk, thank you. My daughter, Joanna, has a therapist, although you'd be hard pushed to know why if you saw the size of her house. Either way, Ibrahim no longer plays bridge, which I think is a shame. Ron had all but invited himself, which won't surprise you. He wasn't buying Japanese opera for a second and walked into the jigsaw room one Thursday, wanting to know what was afoot. Elizabeth admires suspicion above all else and invited Ron to flick through the file of a scoutmaster found burned to death in 1982, in woodland just off the 827. She soon spotted Ron's key strength, namely, he never believes a single word anyone ever tells him. Elizabeth now says that reading police files in the certain knowledge that the police are lying to you is surprisingly effective. It is called the jigsaw room, by the way, because this is where the bigger jigsaws are completed, on a gently sloping wooden table in the center of the room. When I first walked in, there was a 2,000-piecer of Whitstable Harbor, missing a letterbox of sky. I once went to Whitstable, just for the day, but I couldn't really see what the fuss was all about. Once you've done the oysters, there's no real shopping to speak of. Anyway, Ibrahim had put a thick perspex screen over the jigsaw, and this is where he, Elizabeth and Ron were laying out the autopsy photos of the poor girl. The one who Elizabeth thought had been killed by her boyfriend. This particular boyfriend was bitter at being invalided out from the army, but there's always something, isn't there? We all have a sob story, but we don't all go around killing people. Elizabeth told me to shut the door behind me and come and take a look at some pictures. Ibrahim introduced himself, shook my hand and told me there were biscuits. He explained that there were 2 layers, but they tried to finish the top layer before they started the bottom layer. I told him he was preaching to the converted there. Ron took my wine and put it by the biscuits. He nodded at the label and commented that it was a white. He then gave me a kiss on the cheek, which gave me pause for thought. I know you might think that a kiss on the cheek is normal, but from men in their 70s it isn't. The only men who kiss you on the cheek are sons-in-law or people like that. So I had Ron down as a quick worker straight away. I found out that the famous trade union leader Ron Ritchie lived in the village when he and Penny's husband, John, nursed an injured fox back to health and called it Scargill. The story had featured in the village newsletter when I first arrived. Given that John had been a vet and Ron was, well, Ron, I suspected that John had done the nursing and Ron had simply been on naming duties. The newsletter, by the way, is called Cut to the Chase, which is a pun. We all crowded around the autopsy photos. The poor girl, and that wound that should never have killed her, even back in those days. The boyfriend had bolted from Penny's squad car on the way to a police interview and hadn't been seen since. He had given Penny a belt for her troubles too. No surprises there. If you hit women, you hit women. Even if he hadn't run off, I suppose he would have got away with it. I know you still read about these things all the time, but it was even worse back then. The Thursday Murder Club wasn't about to magically bring him to justice, I think everyone knew that. Penny and Elizabeth had solved all sorts of cases to their own satisfaction, but that was as far as they could go. So I suppose you could say that Penny and Elizabeth never really got their wish. All those murderers remained unpunished, all still out there, listening to the shipping forecast somewhere. They had got away with it, as some people do, I'm afraid. The older you get, the more you have to come to terms with that. Anyway, that's just me being philosophical, which will get us nowhere. Last Thursday was the first time it was the 4 of us. Elizabeth, Ibrahim, Ron, and me. And, as I say, it seemed very natural. As if I was completing their jigsaw again. I will leave the diary there for now. There is a big meeting in the village tomorrow. I help to put the chairs out for these sorts of things. I volunteer, because, A, it makes me look helpful and, B, it gives me first dibs at the refreshments. The meeting is a consultation about a new development at Cooper's Chase. Ian Ventham, the big boss, is coming to talk to us about it. I try to be honest where I can, so I hope you don't mind me saying I don't like him. He's all the things that can go wrong with a man if you leave him to his own devices. There has been a fearsome hoo-ha about the new development, because they're chopping down trees and uprooting a graveyard, and there's a rumor of wind turbines. Ron is looking forward to causing a bit of trouble, and I am looking forward to watching him do that. From now on I promise to try to write something every day. I will keep my fingers crossed that something happens. Chapter 5. The Waitrose in Tunbridge Wells has a cafe. Ian Ventham parks his Range Rover in the last empty disabled bay outside, not because he's disabled but because it's nearest to the door. Walking in, he spots Bogdan by the window. Ian owes Bogdan £4,000. He has been stalling for a while, in the hope that Bogdan is thrown out of the country, but thus far, no luck. Anyway, he now has a real job for him, so it's all worked out okay. He gives the Pole a wave and approaches the counter. He scans the chalkboard, looking for a coffee. Is all your coffee fair trade? Yes, all fair trade, smiles the young woman serving. Shame, says Ian. He doesn't want to pay an extra 15 pence to help someone he'll never meet in a country he'll never go to. Cup of tea please. Almond milk. Bogdan isn't Ian's biggest worry that day. If he ends up having to pay him, then so be it. Ian's biggest worry is being killed by Tony Curran. Ian takes his tea over to the table, spotting anyone over 60 as he goes. Over 60, and with Waitrose money? Give them 10 years, he thinks. He wishes he'd brought some brochures. Ian will deal with Tony Curran as and when, but right now he has to deal with Bogdan. The good news is that Bogdan doesn't want to kill him. Ian sits down. What's all this about 2 grand, Bogdan? Ian asks. Bogdan is drinking from a 2-liter bottle of lilt he has smuggled in. 4,000. Is pretty cheap to retile a swimming pool. I don't know if you know that. Only cheap if you do a good job, Bogdan, says Ian. The grouting's discolored. Look. I asked for coral white. Ian takes out his phone, scrolls through to a photo of his new pool and shows it to Bogdan. No, that is filter, let's take off filter. Bogdan presses a button and the image immediately brightens. Coral white. You know it? Ian nods. Worth a try though. Sometimes you have to know when to pay up. Ian takes an envelope out of his pocket. All right, Bogdan, fair's fair. Here's 3 grand. That do you? Bogdan looks weary. 3 grand, sure. Ian hands it over. It's actually 2,800, but that's near enough between friends. Now, I wanted to ask you about something. Sure, says Bogdan, pocketing the money. You seem a bright lad, Bogdan. Bogdan shrugs. Well, I speak fluent Polish. Whenever I ask you to do something, it gets done, and it gets done pretty well, and pretty cheap, says Ian. Thank you, says Bogdan. So I'm just wondering. You ready for something bigger, you think? Sure, says Bogdan. A lot bigger, though, says Ian. Sure, says Bogdan. Big is the same as small. There's just more of it. Good lad, says Ian, and drains the last of his tea. I'm on my way to fire Tony Curran. And I need someone to step up and take his place. You fancy that? Bogdan gives a low whistle. Too much for you, asks Ian. Bogdan shakes his head. No, not too much for me, I can do the job. I just think that if you fire Tony, maybe he kills you. Ian nods. I know. But you let me worry about that. And tomorrow the job's all yours. If you're alive, sure, says Bogdan. Time to go. Ian shakes Bogdan's hand and turns his mind to telling Tony Curran the bad news. There's a consultation meeting down at Cooper's Chase, and he has to listen to what all the old people have to say. Nod politely, wear a tie, call them by their first names. People lap that sort of thing up. He's invited Tony along, so he can fire him straight afterwards. Out in the open air, with witnesses nearby. There is a 10% chance that Tony will kill him on the spot. But that means there is a 90% chance that he won't, and, given how much money it will make Ian, he is comfortable with those odds. Risk and reward. As Ian gets outside, he hears beeping and sees a woman on a mobility scooter furiously pointing at his Range Rover with a cane. I was there first, love, thinks Ian, as he steps into the car. What is wrong with some people? As he drives, Ian listens to a motivational audiobook called Kill or Be Killed, using the lessons of the battlefield in the boardroom. Apparently it was written by someone in the Israeli Special Forces, and it had been recommended to him by one of the personal trainers at the Virgin Active in Tunbridge Wells. Ian isn't certain if the personal trainer himself is Israeli, but he looks like he's from there or thereabouts. As the midday sun fails to force its way through the illegally tinted windows of the Range Rover, Ian starts to think about Tony Curran again. They've been very good for each other over the years, Ian and Tony. Ian would buy up tattered and tired old houses, big ones. Tony would gut them, divide them up, put in the ramps and the handrails, and on they'd go to the next one. The care home business boomed, and Ian built his fortune. He kept a few, he sold a few, he bought a few more. Ian takes a smoothie from the Range Rover's icebox. The icebox had not come as standard. A mechanic in Faversham had fitted it for him, while he was gold-plating the glove box. It is Ian's regular smoothie. A punnet of raspberries, a fistful of spinach, Icelandic yogurt, Finnish, if they are out of Icelandic, spirulina, wheatgrass, acerola cherry powder, chlorella, kelp, acai extract, cocoa nibs, zinc, beetroot essence, chia seeds, mango zest and ginger. It is his own invention, and he calls it Keep It Simple. He checks his watch. About 10 minutes until he gets to Cooper's Chase. Get the meeting done, then break the news to Tony. This morning he had Googled stab-proof vests, but the same-day delivery option had been unavailable. Amazon Prime? They must think he's a mug. He's sure it will be fine, though. And great news that Bogdan's on board to take over. A seamless transition. And cheaper, of course, which is the whole point. Ian had worked out very early on that he needed to take his business upmarket if he wanted to make real money. The worst thing was when clients died. There was admin, rooms left earning nothing as new clients were found and, worst of all, you'd have to deal with the families. Now, the richer a client was, by and large the longer they would live. Also, the richer they were, the less often their family would visit, as they tended to live in London, or New York, or Santiago. So Ian moved upmarket, transforming his company, Autumn Sunset Care Homes, into home-from-home independent living, concentrating on fewer, bigger, properties. Tony Curran hadn't blinked an eye. What Tony didn't know he would quickly learn, and no wet room, electronic keycard or communal barbecue pit could faze him. It seemed a shame to let him go really, but there it was. Ian passes the wooden bus stop on his right, and turns into the entrance to Cooper's Chase. As so often, he follows a delivery van over the cattle grid, and is stuck behind it all the way up the long driveway. Taking in the view on the way, he shakes his head. So many llamas. You live and learn. Ian parks up and makes sure his parking permit is correctly and prominently displayed, on the left-hand side of his windscreen, with permit number and expiration date clearly showing. Ian has been in all sorts of scrapes with all sorts of authorities over the years, and the only two that have ever truly rattled him are the Russian Import Tax Investigation Authority and the Cooper's Chase Parking Committee. Worth it, though. Whatever money he had made before, Cooper's Chase had been in another league entirely. Ian and Tony both knew it. A waterfall of money. Which, of course, was the source of today's problem. Cooper's Chase. 12 acres of beautiful countryside, with permission to build up to 400 retirement flats. Nothing there but an empty convent, and someone's sheep up on the hill. An old friend of his had bought the land off a priest a few years before, then suddenly needed some quick cash to fight off extradition proceedings due to a misunderstanding. Ian did the sums and realized this was a leap worth taking. But Tony had done the sums too, and decided to make a leap of his own. Which is why Tony Curran now owned 25% of everything that he built at Cooper's Chase. Ian had felt compelled to agree to the terms because Tony had never been anything but loyal to him, and also because Tony had made it clear he would break both of Ian's arms if he refused. Ian had seen Tony break people's arms before, and so they were now partners. Not for long, though. Surely Tony knew it couldn't last? Anyone can build a luxury apartment really, strip to the waist, listen to Magic FM, dig out some foundations or shout at a bricklayer. Easy work. But not everyone has the vision to oversee someone building luxury apartments. With the new development about to start, what better time for Tony to learn his true value? Ian Ventham feels emboldened. Kill or be killed. Ian gets out of the car, and as he blinks into the sudden glare of the sun, he just catches the aftertaste of beetroot essence that was one of the key obstacles to him launching Keep It Simple as a commercial proposition. He could leave the beetroot essence out, but it was essential to pancreatic health. Sunglasses on. And so to business. Ian is not planning on dying today. Chapter 6. Ron Ritchie is, as so often, having none of it. He is jabbing a practiced finger at a copy of his lease. He knows it looks good, it always does, but Ron can feel his finger shaking, and the lease shaking. He waves the lease in the air to hide the shakes. His voice has lost none of its power, though. Now here's a quote. And it's your words, Mr. Ventham, not my words. Cooper's Chase Holding Investments reserves the right to develop further residential possibilities on the site, in consultation with current residents. Ron's big frame hints at the physical power he must once have had. The chassis is all still there, like a bull-nosed truck rusting in a field. His face, wide and open, is ready at a second's notice to be outraged or incredulous, or whatever else might be required. Whatever might help. That's what this is, says Ian Ventham, as if talking to a child. This is the consultation meeting. You're the residents. Consult all you like, for the next 20 minutes. Ventham sits at a trestle table at the front of the residence lounge. He is teak-tanned, relaxed and has his sunglasses pushed up over his 1980s catalog model hair. He is wearing an expensive polo shirt, and a watch so large it might as well be a clock. He looks like he smells great, but you wouldn't really want to get close enough to find out for certain. Ventham is flanked by a woman around 15 years his junior and a tattooed man in a sleeveless vest, scrolling through his phone. The woman is the development architect, the tattooed man is Tony Curran. Ron has seen Curran around, has heard about him too. Ibrahim is writing down every word that's said as Ron continues to jab in Ventham's direction. I'm not falling for that old bull, Ventham. This ain't a consultation, it's an ambush. Joyce decides to chip in. You tell him, Ron. Ron fully intends to. Thanks, Joyce. You're calling it the Woodlands, even though you're cutting down all the trees. That's rich, old son. You've got your nice little computer pictures, all done up, sun shining, fluffy clouds, little ducks swimming on ponds. You can prove anything with computers, son. We wanted to see a proper scale model. With model trees and little people. This gets a ripple of applause. A lot of people had wanted to see a scale model, but according to Ian Ventham it wasn't the done thing these days. Ron continues. And you've chosen, deliberately chosen, a woman architect, so I won't be allowed to shout. You are shouting though, Ron, says Elizabeth, who is 2 seats away, reading a newspaper. Don't you tell me when I'm shouting, Elizabeth, shouts Ron. This geezer'll know when I'm shouting. Look at him, dressed up like Tony Blair. Why don't you bomb the Iraqis while you're at it, Ventham? Good line, thinks Ron, as Ibrahim dutifully writes it down for the record. Back in the days when he was in the papers, they called him Red Ron, though everyone was Red something in those days. Ron's picture was rarely in the papers without the caption "Talks between the two sides collapsed late last night." A veteran of picket lines and police cells, of blacklegs, blacklists and bust UPS, of slowdowns and sit-ins, of wildcats and walkouts, Ron had been there, warming his hands over a brazier, with the old gang at British Leland. Ron had seen, firsthand, the demise of the dockers. Ron had picketed Wapping as he witnessed the victory of Rupert Murdoch and the collapse of the printers. Ron had led the Kent miners up the A1 and had been arrested at Orgreave as the final resistance of the coal industry was crushed. In fact, a man less indefatigable than Ron might have considered himself a Jenks. But that's the fate of the underdog, and Ron simply loved to be the underdog. If he ever found himself in a situation where he wasn't the underdog, he would twist and turn and shake that situation until he had convinced everyone that he was. But Ron had always practiced what he had preached. He had always quietly helped anyone who had needed a leg up, needed a few extra quid at Christmas, needed a suit or a solicitor for court. Anyone who, for any reason, had needed a champion, had always been safe in Ron's tattooed arms. The tattoos are fading now, the hands are shaking, but the fire still burns. You know where you can shove this lease, don't you, Ventham? Feel free to enlighten me, says Ian Ventham. Ron then starts to make a point about David Cameron and the EU referendum, but loses his thread. Ibrahim places a hand on his elbow. Ron nods the nod of a man whose work here is done, and he sits, knees cracking like gunshots. He's happy. And he notices his shakes have stopped, just for the moment. Back in the fight. There was nothing like it. Chapter 7. As Father Matthew Mackey slips in at the back of the lounge, a large man in a West Ham shirt is shouting about Tony Blair. There is a big turnout, as he had hoped. That's useful, plenty of objections to the Woodlands development. There had been no buffet service on the train from Bexhill, and so he is glad to see there are biscuits. He grabs a handful when no one is looking, takes a blue plastic seat in the back row and settles himself in. The man in the tightly fitting football top is running out of steam now, and, as he sits down, other hands go up. Hopefully this was a wasted trip, but it is far better to be safe than sorry. Father Mackey is aware that he is nervous. He adjusts his dog collar, runs a hand through his shock of snowy white hair and dips into his pocket for a shortbread finger. If someone doesn't ask about the cemetery, perhaps he should. Just be brave. Remember, he has a job to do. How peculiar to be in this room. He shivers. Probably just the cold. Chapter 8. The consultation over, Ron is sitting with Joyce beside the bowling green, cold beers glinting in the sunshine. He is currently being distracted by a retired, one-armed jeweler from Ruskin Court, called Dennis Edmonds. Dennis, to whom Ron has never spoken before, wants to congratulate Ron on the very salient points he made during the consultation meeting. Thought-provoking, Ron, thought-provoking. Plenty to chew on there. Ron thanks Dennis for his kind words, and waits for the move that he knows is coming. The move that always comes. And this must be your son, says Dennis, turning towards Jason Ritchie, also cradling a beer. The champ. Jason smiles and nods, as polite as always. Dennis extends his arm. Dennis. I'm a friend of your dad's. Jason shakes the man's hand. Jason. How do you do, Dennis? Dennis stares for a beat, waiting for Jason to start a conversation, then nods enthusiastically. Well, a pleasure to meet you, I'm a huge fan, seen all your fights. We'll see you soon again, I hope. Jason nods politely again and Dennis ambles off, forgetting even to pretend to say goodbye to Ron. Father and son, well used to these interruptions, resume their conversation with Joyce. "Yeah, it's called Famous Family Trees," says Jason. "They've researched the family history and they want to take me round various places, tell me a bit about, family history. Great granny's a prostitute and all that." "I ain't seen it," says Ron. "What is it, BBC?" "It's ITV, it's really very good, Ron," says Joyce. "I saw one recently, did you see it, Jason, with the actor? He's the doctor from Holby City, but I've also seen him in a Poirot." "I didn't see it, Joyce," says Jason. "It was very interesting. His grandfather, it turns out, had murdered his lover. A gay lover as well. His face was a picture." "Oh, you should do it, Jason." Joyce claps. "Imagine if Ron had a gay granddad. I'd enjoy that." Jason nods. "They'd want to talk to you too, Dad. On camera. They asked if you'd be up for it, and I told them good luck shutting you up." Ron laughs. "But are you really doing that celebrity ice dance thing as well? I thought it might be fun." "Oh, I agree," says Joyce, finishing her beer and reaching for another. "You're doing a lot at the moment, son," says Ron. "Joyce says she saw you on MasterChef." Jason shrugs. "You're right, Dad. I should go back to boxing." "I can't believe you'd never made a macaroon before, Jason," says Joyce. Ron knocks back some of his beer, then motions over to his left with the bottle. "Over by the BMW, Jace, don't look now, that's Bentham, the one I was telling you about. I ran rings around him, didn't I, Joyce?" "He didn't know if he was coming or going, Ron," agrees Joyce. Jason leans back and stretches, a casual look to his left as he does so. Joyce moves her chair to get a better view. "Yeah, nice and subtle, Joyce," says Ron. "That's Curran with him, Jace, the builder. You ever come across him in town?" "Once or twice," says Jason. Ron looks over again. The conversation between the men looks tense. Talking fast and low, hands aggressive and defensive, but contained. "They having a little Barney, you think?" he asks. Jason sips his beer and scans across to the car park again, taking the men in. "They're like a couple out on a date, pretending they're not having an argument," says Joyce. "In a Pizza Express." "You've nailed it there, Joyce," agrees Jason, turning back to his dad and finishing his beer. "Game of snooker this afternoon, son," says Ron. "Or are you shooting off?" "Love to, Dad, but I've got a little errand." "Anything I can help with?" Jason shakes his head. "Boring one, won't take long." He stands and stretches. "You haven't had any journalists ringing you up today, have you?" "Should I have?" asks Ron. "Something up?" "Nah, journalists. But no calls, no mail, or anything." "I had a catalog for walk-in baths," says Ron. "You want to tell me why you're asking?" "You know me, Dad, they're always after something." "How exciting," says Joyce. "See you both," says Jason. "Don't get drunk and smash the place up." Jason leaves. Joyce turns her face up to the sun and closes her eyes. "Well, isn't this lovely, Ron? I never knew I liked beer. Imagine if I'd died at 70. I never would have known." "Cheers to that, Joyce," says Ron, and polishes off his drink. "What do you reckon's up with Jason?" "Probably a woman," says Joyce. "You know what we're like." Ron nods. "Probably, yeah." He watches his son depart into the distance. He's worried. But then there's never been a day with Jason, whether in the ring, or out, when Ron hasn't worried. Chapter 9. The consultation went well. Ian Bentham is no longer worried about the Woodlands, it's a done deal. "The loud guy from the meeting?" He'd met his type before. Let him blow himself out. He'd also seen a priest at the back of the room. What was that? The cemetery, he guessed, but it was all above board, he had all the permits. Let them try and stop him. And sacking Tony Curran? Well, he hadn't been happy, but he hadn't killed him either. Advantage Ian. So, Ian Bentham is already thinking ahead. After the Woodlands is up and running, there will be another, final phase of the development, Hillcrest. He has driven the 5 minutes up a rough track from Cooper's Chase and is now sitting in the country kitchen of Karen Playfair. Her father, Gordon, owns the farmland at the top of the hill, adjoining Cooper's Chase, and he seems in no mood to sell. No matter, Ian has his ways. I'm afraid nothing has changed, Ian, says Karen Playfair. My dad won't sell, and I can't make him. I hear you, says Ian. More money. No, I think, says Karen, and I think you know this already, I think he just doesn't like you. Gordon Playfair had taken one look at Ian Bentham and disappeared upstairs. Ian could hear him stomping about, proving whatever point he was proving. Who cared? Sometimes people didn't like Ian. He has never quite worked out why, but over the years has learned to live with it. Certainly, it was their problem. Gordon Playfair was just another in a long line of people who didn't get him. But listen, leave it with me, says Karen. I'll find a way. It'll work for everyone. Karen Playfair gets him. He has been talking her through the sort of money she could expect if she persuades her dad to sell up. Her sister and brother-in-law have their own business, Organic Raisins in Brighton, and Ian has already tried this line on them, and failed. Karen Playfair is a much better bet. She lives alone in a cottage on the land and she works in IT, which you can tell just by looking at her. She is wearing makeup, but in a subtle, understated way that Ian honestly can't see the point of. Ian wonders exactly when Karen had given up on life and started wearing trainers and long, baggy jumpers. And you'd think, given that she works in IT, she could have Googled Botox. She must be 50, Ian thinks, same age as him. Different for women, though. Ian is on a lot of dating apps, and sets a strict upper age limit of 25. He finds the dating apps useful, because it can be hard to meet exactly the right kind of women these days. They need to understand that his time is limited and his work demanding, and that commitment is hard for him. Women over 25 don't seem to get that, in his experience. What happens to them, he wonders. He tries to imagine why someone would choose to date Karen Playfair, but draws a blank. Conversation. That runs out soon enough, doesn't it? She'll be rich soon, of course, when Ian buys the land. That will help her. Hillcrest will be a real life changer for Ian, too. It will eventually double the size of Cooper's Chase, and so double Ian's profits. Profits he will no longer have to share with Tony Curran. If that meant having to flirt with a 50-year-old for a couple of weeks, then so be it. On dates, Ian has his tried and tested material. He'll impress young women with pictures of his pool, and the time he was interviewed on Kent Tonight. He had already shown Karen a picture of his pool, because you never knew, but she had simply smiled politely and nodded. No wonder she was single. He could do business with her, though. She knew the upsides here, and she knew the obstacles, and they end their conversation with a handshake and a plan of action. As he shakes Karen's hand, Ian thinks that using a bit of hand cream every now and again wouldn't kill her. 50. He wouldn't wish it on anyone. The thought briefly occurs to Ian that the only woman over 25 he spends any time with at all is his wife. Oh well, time to go. Things to do. Chapter 10. Tony Curran has made up his mind. He brings his BMW X7 to a halt on his heated driveway. There is a gun buried under the sycamore in the back garden. Or is it under the beach? It's one or the other, but that's something he can think about with a nice cup of tea. And he can try to remember where his spade is, while he's at it. Tony Curran is going to kill Ian Bentham, that's a given now. Surely Ian knows it too? You can only take so many liberties before even the most calm and rational man snaps. Tony whistles a tune from an advert and heads indoors. He moved in about 18 months ago, on the first real profits from Cooper's Chase. It was the type of house he had always dreamed of. A house built on hard work, on making the right choices, cutting the right corners and backing his own talent. A monument to what he had achieved, in brick, glass and tempered walnut. Tony lets himself in and sets to work switching off the alarm. Bentham had got some of his gang to fit it last week. Polish, the lot of them, but then who isn't these days? Tony gets the 4-digit code right on the third attempt. A new record. Tony Curran has always taken his security very seriously. For many years Tony's building company had really just been a front for his drugs business. A way to explain away his income. A way to wash his dirty money. But it slowly got bigger, took up more of his time, brought in more and more money. If you'd told young Tony he would end up living in this house, he wouldn't have been at all surprised. If you'd told him he'd be buying it with money earned legally, he'd have keeled over there and then. His wife, Debbie, is not back, but that suits him fine for now. Gives him time to concentrate, really think it all through. Tony rewinds to the row with Ian Bentham, and his fury rises again. Ian was cutting him out of the woodlands. Just like that? A conversation on the way to his car? Outdoors, just in case Tony felt like swinging a punch. He would love to have smacked him there and then, but that was the old Tony. So they'd had a little row, nice and quiet. No one could possibly have noticed, and that's good for Tony. When Bentham turns up dead, no one can say they saw Tony Curran and Ian Bentham having a ding-dong. Keeps it clean. Tony sits on a bar stool, pulls it up to the island in his vast kitchen and slides open a drawer. He needs to get a plan down on paper. Tony is not a believer in luck, he's a believer in hard work. If you fail to prepare, you prepare to fail. An old English teacher of Tony's had once told him that, and he'd never forgotten it. The next year he had torched the same teacher's car, following an argument about a football, but Tony still had to hand it to the guy. If you fail to prepare, you prepare to fail. As it turns out, there is no paper in the drawer, so Tony decides to work out the plan in his head instead. Nothing needs to be done tonight. Let the world continue for a while, let the birds keep singing in the garden, let Bentham think he has won. And then strike. Why did people ever mess with Tony Curran? When had that ever worked out for anyone? Tony hears the noise a second too late. He turns to see the spanner as it swings towards him. A big one too, real old school stuff. There's no way of avoiding the swing and, in the brief moment of realization he has, Tony Curran gets it. You can't win 'em all, Tony. That's fair enough, he thinks, that's fair enough. The blow catches Tony on the left temple and he collapses to the marble floor. The birds in the garden stop singing for the briefest of moments and then continue their merry tune. High up in the sycamore tree. Or is it the beach? The killer places a photograph on the worktop, as Tony Curran's fresh blood begins to form a moat around his walnut kitchen island. Mystery Club. Chapter 11. Cooper's Chase always wakes early. As the foxes finish their nightly rounds and the birds begin their roll call, the first kettles whistle and low lamps start to appear in curtained windows. Morning joints creak into life. Nobody here is grabbing toast before an early train to the office, or packing a lunchbox before waking the kids, but there is much to do nonetheless. Many years ago, everybody here would wake early because there was a lot to do and only so many hours in the day. Now they wake early because there is a lot to do and only so many days left. Ibrahim is always up by 6. The swimming pool doesn't open until 7, for health and safety reasons. He has argued, unsuccessfully, that the risk of drowning while swimming unsupervised is dwarfed by the risk of dying from cardiovascular disease or respiratory or circulatory illness due to lack of regular exercise. He even produced an algorithm proving that keeping the pool open 24 hours a day would make residents 31.7% safer than closing it overnight. The Leisure and Recreation Amenities Committee remained unmoved. Ibrahim could see that their hands were tied by various directives and so held no grudge. The algorithm was neatly filed away, should it ever be needed again. There was always a lot to do. "I have a job for you, Ibrahim," says Elizabeth, sipping a mint tea. "Well, a job for you and Ron, but I'm putting you in charge." "Very wise," says Ibrahim, nodding. "If I might say." Elizabeth had rung him the night before with the news about Tony Curran. She had heard from Ron, who had heard it from Jason, who had heard it from a source yet to be documented. Dead in his kitchen, blunt force trauma to the head, found by his wife. Ibrahim usually likes to spend this hour looking through old case notes and sometimes even new ones. He still has a few clients and, if they are ever in need, they will make the trip out to Cooper's Chase and sit in the battered chair under the painting of the sailing boat, both of which have followed him around for nearly 40 years now. Yesterday, Ibrahim had been reading the notes of an old client of his, a Midland bank manager from Godalming who took in stray dogs and killed himself one Christmas day. No such luck this morning, Ibrahim thinks. Elizabeth had arrived with the sunrise. He is finding the break in his routine challenging. "All I need you to do is to lie to a senior police officer," says Elizabeth. "Can I trust you with that?" "When can you not trust me, Elizabeth?" says Ibrahim. "When have I let you down?" "Well, never, Ibrahim," agrees Elizabeth. "That's why I like to keep you around. Also, you make very good tea." Ibrahim knows he is a safe pair of hands. Over the years he has saved lives and saved souls. He was good at what he did, and that's why, even now, some people will drive for miles, past the old phone box and the farm shop, turning right just after the bridge and left by the wooden bus stop, just to speak to an 80-year-old psychiatrist, long retired. Sometimes he fails, who doesn't, in this world? And those are the files that Ibrahim will reach for in those early mornings. The bank manager who sat in the battered chair and cried and could not be saved. But this morning there are different priorities, he understands that. This morning the Thursday Murder Club has a real-life case. Not just yellowing pages of smudge type from another age. A real case, a real corpse and, somewhere out there, a real killer. This morning Ibrahim is needed. Which is what he lives for. Chapter 12. PC Donna DeFreitas carries a tray of teas into the incident room. A local builder, Tony something, has been murdered, and judging by the size of the assembled team it's a big deal. Donna wonders why. If she takes her time with the teas, maybe she can find out. DCI Chris Hudson is addressing the team. He always seems nice enough. He once opened some double doors for her without looking like he wanted a medal for it. There are cameras at the property, and plenty of them. Get the footage. Tony Curran left Cooper's Chase at 2 p.m. and he died at 3:32, according to his Fitbit. That's only a small window to search. Donna has placed the tea tray on a desk while she stoops to tie her shoelace. She hears Cooper's Chase mentioned, which is interesting. There are also cameras on the A214, around 400 meters south of Curran's home, and half a mile north, so let's get hold of that footage too. You know the time frame. Chris stops for a moment and looks over at where Donna DeFreitas is crouching. "Everything all right, Constable?" he asks. Donna straightens up. "Yes, sir, just tying my shoelaces. Wouldn't want to trip with a tray of tea." "Very wise," agrees Chris. "Thank you for the tea. We'll let you get on now." "Thank you, sir," says Donna, and walks towards the door. She realizes that Chris, a detective of course, has probably spotted that her shoes have no laces. But surely he wouldn't blame a young constable for a bit of healthy curiosity. As she opens the door to leave, she hears Chris Hudson continue. Until we get all that, the biggest lead is the photograph the killer left by the body. Let's take a look. Donna can't resist turning and sees, projected onto the wall, an old photograph, 3 men in a pub, laughing and drinking. Their table is covered in banknotes. She only has a moment, but she recognizes one of the men immediately. Things would be very different when Donna was part of a murder squad, very different. No more visiting primary schools to write serial numbers on bikes in invisible ink. No more politely reminding local shopkeepers that overflowing bins were actually a criminal off constable, says Chris, snapping Donna from her train of thought. Donna takes her eyes off the photo and looks at Chris. Firmly, but kindly, he motions that she is free to leave. Donna smiles at Chris and nods. Daydreaming. Sorry, sir. She opens the door, walks through, back to the boredom. She strains to hear every last word before the door finally swings shut. So, 3 men, all of whom we obviously know very well. Shall we take them one by one? The door clunks shut. Donna sighs. Chapter 13. Joyce, I hope you will forgive a morning diary entry, but Tony Curran is dead. Tony Curran is the builder who put this place up. Perhaps he even laid the bricks in my fireplace? Who knows? I mean, probably not. He probably had someone else to do that for him, didn't he? And all the plastering and what have you. He would have just overseen things, I suppose. But I bet his fingerprints are here somewhere. Which is quite a thrill. Elizabeth rang me last night with the news. I would never describe Elizabeth as breathless, but, honestly, she wasn't far off. Tony Curran was bludgeoned, of all things, by hand, or hands, unknown. I told her what I'd seen with Ron and Jason, the row between Curran and Ian Bentham. She told me she already knew, so she must have spoken to Ron before she spoke to me, but she was polite enough to listen as I gave my view of it. I asked her if she was taking notes and she said she would remember it. Anyway, Elizabeth seems to have some sort of plan. She said she is seeing Ibrahim this morning. I asked her if there was any way I might be able to help and she said that there was. So I asked her what that way might be and she said if I held my horses, I would find out soon enough. So I suppose I sit and wait for instructions. I'm going to take the minibus into Fairhaven later, but I shall keep my mobile on just in case. I have become someone who has to keep their mobile on. Chapter 14. So who killed Tony Curran, and how do we catch him, asks Elizabeth. Or catch him or her, I know I should say, but it's probably him. What kind of woman would bludgeon someone? A Russian woman, but that's about it. After giving Ibrahim his instructions for the day, Elizabeth had headed straight over for this chat. She is in her usual chair. He absolutely seems the type to have had enemies. Sleeveless vest, big house, more tattoos than Ron, so on and so forth. The police will be making a list of suspects right now and we'll have to get our hands on it. In the absence of their list, though, why don't we look at whether Ian Bentham killed Tony Curran? You remember Ian Bentham? With the aftershave? Bentham and Tony Curran had a little fight. Ron saw them, of course, when does he ever miss a thing? And Joyce said something about Pizza Express, but I knew what she meant. Elizabeth tries to mention Joyce more often these days, because why deny it? Shall we make some reasonable assumptions? Let's say that Bentham is unhappy with Curran, or Curran is unhappy with Bentham. It doesn't much matter which. They have something to discuss, and yet they meet in public, which is peculiar. Elizabeth checks her watch. She is subtle about it, despite everything. So, let's say straight after the consultation meeting, Bentham has bad news to break. He fears Curran's reaction so much that he meets him in public view. He hopes to placate him. But in Ron's view he was unsuccessful. I'm paraphrasing Ron there. There is a small sponge cube on a stick next to the bed. Elizabeth places it in a jug of water and wets Penny's dry lips. The metallic chirp of Penny's heart monitor fills the silence. So how would Bentham react, in that scenario, Penny? Facing Curran with a grudge? Switch to plan B? Follow Curran to his house? Let me in, let's just talk about this, perhaps I've been too hasty. And then, wallop, as simple as that, don't you think? He kills Curran before Curran kills him. Elizabeth looks around for her bag. She places her hands on the arms of the chair, ready to leave. But why? That's the question I know you'd ask. I'm going to try and take a look at their financial relationship. Chase the money. There's a man in Geneva who owes me a favor, so we should be able to get Bentham's financial records by this evening. Either way, it sounds like fun, doesn't it? An adventure. And I think we'll have a few tricks that the police won't. I'm sure they'd appreciate a bit of help, and that's my task for this morning. Elizabeth gets out of her chair and walks to the side of the bed. A real murder to investigate, Penny. I promise I won't let you miss a thing. She kisses her best friend on the forehead. She turns to the chair on the other side of the bed and gives a small smile. How are you, John? Penny's husband puts down his book and looks up. Oh, you know. I do know. You always know where I am, John. The nurses say Penny Gray can hear nothing, but who is to say? John never speaks to Penny while Elizabeth is in the room. He comes into Willow's at 7 each morning and he leaves at 9 each evening, back to the flat that he and Penny had lived in together. Back to the holiday trinkets and the old photos and the memories that he and Penny shared for 50 years. She knows that he talks to Penny when she is not there. And every time she walks in, always after knocking, she notices the fading white prints of John's hand on Penny's. His hand back on his book, though he always seems to be on the same page. Elizabeth leaves the lovers together. Chapter 15. Joyce. Every Wednesday I take the residence minibus into Fairhaven to do a spot of shopping. On Mondays it goes to Tunbridge Wells, half an hour in the other direction, but I like the younger feel of Fairhaven. I like to see what people are wearing and I like to hear the seagulls. The driver's name is Carlito and he is generally understood to be Spanish, but I have chatted to him a number of times now and it turns out he is Portuguese. He is very good about it though. There is a vegan cafe, just off the seafront, that I found a few months ago and I am already looking forward to a nice mint tea and an almond flour brownie. I am not a vegan and have no intention of ever becoming one, but I still feel like it's something that should be encouraged. I read that if mankind doesn't stop eating meat, there will be mass starvation by 2050. With respect, I am nearly 80 and so this won't be my problem, but I do hope they sort it out. My daughter Joanna is vegetarian and one day I will take her there. We'll just drop in, as if me visiting a vegan cafe is the most natural thing in the world. The usual crowd are always on the bus. There are the regulars, Peter and Carol, a nice couple from Ruskin, who take the minibus down to visit their daughter who lives on the front. I know there are no grandkids, but nonetheless she seems to be at home during the day. There will be a story there. There's Sir Nicholas, who just goes for a mooch now they won't let him drive anymore. There's Naomi with her hip that they can't get to the bottom of and a woman from Wordsworth whose name I have never quite caught and am now too embarrassed to ask. She is friendly enough though. Elaine. I know that Bernard will be in his customary position at the back. I always feel like I would like to sit next to him, he is jolly company when he turns his mind to it. But I know he visits Fairhaven for his late wife, so I leave him in peace. That's where they met and that's where they lived before they moved in here. He told me that since she died he would go to the Adelphi Hotel where she used to work and polish off a couple of glasses of wine, overlooking the sea. That's how I first found out about the minibus, if I'm honest, so silver linings. They turned the Adelphi into a travelodge last year, so now Bernard sits on the pier. That is less desolate than it sounds, as they recently revamped it and it has won a number of awards. Perhaps I will just sit next to him at the back of the bus one day. What am I waiting for? I'm looking forward to my tea and brownie, but I'm also looking forward to a bit of peace and quiet. The whole of Cooper's Chase is still gossiping about poor Tony Curran. We are around death a lot here, but even so. Not everyone is bludgeoned, are they? Right, that's me. If anything happens, I will report back. Chapter 16. As the minibus is about to leave, the doors slide open for a final time and Elizabeth steps in. She takes the seat next to Joyce. "Good morning, Joyce," she says, smiling. "Well, this is a first," says Joyce. "How lovely." "I brought a book, if you don't want to talk on the journey," says Elizabeth. "Oh no, let's talk," says Joyce. Carlito pulls away with his customary care. "Splendid," says Elizabeth. "I haven't really brought a book." Elizabeth and Joyce settle into conversation. They are very careful not to talk about the Tony Curran case. One of the first things you learn at Cooper's Chase is that some people can still actually hear. Instead, Elizabeth tells Joyce about the last time she went to Fairhaven, which was sometime in the 1960s and whose purpose concerned a piece of equipment that had washed up on the beach. Elizabeth refuses to be drawn into details, but tells Joyce it was almost certainly now a matter of public record and she could presumably look it up somewhere if she was interested. The journey passes very pleasantly. The sun is up, the skies are blue and murder is in the air. As always, Carlito stops the minibus outside Ryman's. Everyone knows to meet back here in 3 hours' time. Carlito has done this job for 2 years now and not a single person has ever been late. Except for Malcolm Weeks, who, as it turned out, had died in the light bulb aisle in Robert Dias. Joyce and Elizabeth let the others out first, allowing their assault course of ramps and sticks and frames to disperse. Bernard doffs his hat to the ladies as he exits and they watch as he shuffles towards the seafront, his Daily Express tucked under his arm. As they step down from the bus and Elizabeth thanks Carlito for his considerate driving in perfect Portuguese, Joyce thinks to ask for the first time what Elizabeth is planning to do in Fairhaven. "Same as you, dear. Shall we?" Elizabeth starts walking away from the seafront and Joyce chooses to follow, keen for adventure, but still hopeful she might have time for her tea and brownie. A short walk away is Western Road and the broad stone steps of Fairhaven Police Station. Elizabeth turns back to Joyce, as the automatic doors open in front of her. "Here's the way I see it, Joyce. If we are going to investigate this murder, we're going to investigate the murder," asks Joyce. "Of course we are, Joyce," says Elizabeth. "Who better than us? But we have no access to any case files, any witness statements, any forensics, and we are going to have to change that. Which is why we're here. I know I don't need to say this, Joyce, but just back me up, whatever happens." Joyce nods, Of course, of course." They walk in. Once inside, the two ladies are buzzed through a security door into a public reception area. Joyce has never been inside a police station before, though has watched every ITV documentary going and is disappointed that no one is being wrestled to the ground and dragged to a cell, their obscenities thrillingly bleeped out. Instead there is just a young desk sergeant, pretending he isn't playing patience on his home office computer. "How can I help you, ladies?" he asks. Elizabeth starts to cry. Joyce manages to control her double take. "Someone just stole my bag." Outside Holland and Barrett, weeps Elizabeth. So that's why she didn't have a bag with her, thinks Joyce. That had been bugging her in the minibus. Joyce puts her arm around her friend's shoulders. "It was awful. Let me get an officer to take a statement from you and we'll see what we can do." The desk sergeant presses a buzzer on the wall to his left, and within seconds a young constable enters through a further security door behind him. "Mark, this lady has just had her handbag stolen on Queen's Road. Can you take a statement? I'll make a cuppa for everyone." "Certainly. Madam, if you'll follow me." Elizabeth stands her ground and refuses to move. She is shaking her head, cheeks wet with tears now. "I want to talk to a female police constable." "I'm sure Mark can sort this out for you," says the desk sergeant. "Please," cries Elizabeth. Joyce decides the time has come to help her friend out. "My friend is a nun, Sergeant." "A nun," says the desk sergeant. "Yes, a nun," says Joyce. "And I'm sure I don't need to tell you what that entails." The desk sergeant sees that this is a discussion that could end badly in so many ways and chooses an easy life. "If you'll give me a moment, madam, I will find someone for you." He follows Mark back through the security door, and Elizabeth and Joyce are alone for a minute. Elizabeth stops the waterworks and looks over at Joyce. "A nun? That was very good." "I didn't have much time to think," says Joyce. "If pushed, I was going to say someone had touched me," says Elizabeth. "You know how hot they are on that these days. But a nun is much more fun. Why do you want to see a female officer?" Joyce has a number of other questions now, but this is first in the queue. "And well done on not saying WPC, by the way. I'm proud of you." "Thank you, Joyce. I just thought that, as the bus was going into Fairhaven anyway, we should pop in and see PC de Freitas." Joyce nods slowly. In Elizabeth's world that is absolutely the sort of thing that makes sense. But what if she's not on shift? Or what if she is, but there are other female constables? "Would I have brought you here if I hadn't already checked that, Joyce?" "How did you check?" The security door opens and Donna de Freitas steps through. "Now, ladies, how can I?" Donna registers who is in front of her. She looks from Elizabeth to Joyce and back again. "Help you." Chapter 17. DCI Chris Hudson has been given a file on Tony Curran so thick it makes a pleasing thud if you drop it on a desk. Which is what he has just done. Chris takes a swig of Diet Coke. He sometimes worries he is addicted to it. He had read a headline about Diet Coke once, which was so worrying he had chosen not to read the article. He opens the file. Most of Tony Curran's dealings with Kent police were from before Chris's time in Fairhaven. Charges for assault in his 20s, minor drug convictions, dangerous driving, dangerous dog, possession of an illegal weapon. A tax disc misdemeanor. Public urination. Then comes the real story. Chris opens an indeterminate sandwich from the garage. There are transcripts of a number of interviews held with Tony Curran over the years, with the last one being after a shooting in the Blackbridge pub, which left a young drug dealer dead. A witness recognized Tony Curran as firing the fatal shot, and Fairhaven Sid called Curran in for questioning. Tony Curran had been in the middle of everything back then. Ask around and anyone would tell you. Tony ran the drugs trade in Fairhaven, and plenty more besides. Made a lot of money. Chris reads the depressingly familiar stream of no comments on the Blackbridge transcript. He reads that the witness, a local taxi driver, had disappeared soon after. Scared away, or worse. Tony Curran, local builder, walked away scot-free. So what was that? 1 death? 2. The drug dealer shot at the Blackbridge and, perhaps, the poor taxi driver who witnessed it? Since 2000 though, nothing. A speeding ticket, promptly paid, in 2009. He looks at the photograph the killer had left by the body. 3 men. Tony Curran, now dead. With his arm around Tony was a local dealer from back in the day, Bobby Tanner. Hired as muscle. Whereabouts currently unknown, but they would track him down soon enough. And the 3rd man, whereabouts very much known. The ex-boxer Jason Ritchie. Chris wonders what the newspapers would pay for this photo. He has heard of officers doing this. The lowest of the low, as far as Chris is concerned. He looks at the smiles, the banknotes, and the beers. It was probably sometime around 2000, when the boy was shot in the Black Bridge. Funny to think of the year 2000 as ancient history. Chris opens a Twix as he studies the photo. He has his annual medical in 2 months, and every Monday he convinces himself that this is finally the week he gets back into shape, finally shifts the stone or so that holds him back. The stone or so that gives him cramp. The stone or so that stops him buying new clothes, just in case, and that stops him dating, because who would want this? The stone or so that stands between him and the world. 2 stone if he's really honest. Those Mondays are usually good. Chris doesn't take the lift on Mondays. Chris brings food from home on Mondays. Chris does sit UPS in bed on Mondays. But by Tuesday, or, in a good week, Wednesday, the world creeps back in, the stairs seem too daunting and Chris loses faith in the project. He's aware that the project is himself, and that drags him further down still. So out come the pasties and the crisps, the petrol station lunch, the quick drink after work, the takeaway on the way home from work, the chocolate on the way home from the takeaway. The eating, the numbing, the release, the shame, and then repeat. But there was always next Monday, and one of these Mondays there would be salvation. That stone would drop off, followed by the other stone that was lurking. He'd barely break sweat at the medical, he'd be the athlete he always secretly knew he was. Text a thumbs up to the new girlfriend he'd have met online. He finishes the Twix and looks around for his crisps. Chris Hudson guesses that the Black Bridge shooting was the wake-up call that Tony Curran had needed. That was certainly how it looked. He had started working with a local property developer called Ian Ventham around this time, and perhaps he decided life would be simpler if he turned legit. There was good money in it, even if it was not what he had grown used to. Tony must have known he couldn't keep riding his luck. Chris opens his crisps and looks at his watch. He has an appointment and he should probably head off. Someone saw Tony Curran having a row just before he died, and that someone is insisting on talking to him personally. It's not a long trip. The retirement community Curran had been working at. Chris looks at the photo again. The 3 men, that happy gang. Tony Curran and Bobby Tanner, arms around each other. And, off to the side, a bottle in his hand and that handsome broken nose, maybe a couple of years past the height of his powers, Jason Ritchie. 3 friends, drinking beer, at a table covered with money. Why leave the photo by the body? A warning from Bobby Tanner or Jason Ritchie. A warning to them. You're next? More likely a red herring, or a misdirect. No one would be so stupid. Either way, Chris will need to have a chat with Jason Ritchie. And, hopefully, his team will find their missing man, Bobby Tanner. Actually, their missing man, thinks Chris, tipping the last of his crisps into his mouth. Because, who took the photograph in the first place? Chapter 18. Donna motions for her 2 visitors to sit. They are in interview suite B, a boxy, windowless room, with a wooden table bolted to the floor. Joyce looks around her with the excitement of a tourist. Elizabeth looks at home. Donna has her eyes on the heavy door, waiting for it to swing shut. The moment it clicks into place, she looks straight at Elizabeth. So you're a nun now, Elizabeth. Elizabeth nods quickly, raising a finger to acknowledge that this is a good question. Donna, like any modern woman, I am any number of things, as and when the need arises. We have to be chameleons, don't we? She takes a notepad and pen from an inside coat pocket and places them on the table. But Joyce takes the credit for that one. Joyce is still staring around the room. This is exactly like you see on television, P.C. de Freitas. How wonderful. It must be so much fun to work here. Donna is not sharing in the sense of awe. So, Elizabeth. Have you had a bag stolen? No, dear, says Elizabeth. Good luck to anyone trying to steal my bag. Can you imagine? Then can I ask what the two of you are doing here? I have work that needs finishing. Elizabeth nods. Of course, that's very reasonable. Well, I'm here because I wanted to talk to you about something. And Joyce was here for shopping, I presume. Joyce. I realize I haven't asked. I like to go to anything with a pulse, the vegan cafe, if you know it. Donna looks at her watch, then leans forward. Well, here I am. If you want to talk, go ahead. I'll give you 2 minutes before I go back to catching criminals. Elizabeth gives a light clap of the hands. Excellent. Well, first I will say this. Stop pretending you are not pleased to see us again, because I know that you are. And we're pleased to see you again. This will be so much more fun if we can all just accept that. Donna does not reply. Joyce leans into the tape recorder sitting on the table. For the purposes of the tape, P.C. DeFreitas refuses to answer, but is attempting to hide a slight smile. Secondly, but connected to that, continues Elizabeth, whatever it is we are keeping you from, I know one thing for certain, it isn't catching criminals. It is something boring. No comment, deadpans Donna. Where are you from, Donna? May I call you Donna? You may. I'm from South London. Transferred from the Met. Donna nods. Elizabeth makes a note in her book. You're taking notes, asks Donna. Elizabeth nods. Why so? And why to Fairhaven? That's a story for another day. You have one more question before I leave the room. Fun though this is. Of course, replies Elizabeth. She shuts her notebook and adjusts her glasses. Well, I have a statement really, but I promise it ends with a question. Donna turns up her palms, inviting Elizabeth to continue. This is what I see, and I know you'll stop me if I misspeak. You are in your mid-20s, you give the impression of being clever and intuitive. You also give the impression of being very kind, yet very handy should a fight erupt. For reasons we will get to the bottom of, almost certainly a doomed relationship, you have left London, where I would have thought the life and the work would have suited you to a T. You find yourself here, in Fairhaven, where the crime is minor and the criminals are petty. And you are pounding the streets. Maybe a junkie steals a bicycle, Donna, maybe someone drives off from a petrol station without paying, or maybe there's a fight, over a girl, in a pub. Goodness me, what a bore. For reasons that are not of importance, I once worked in a bar in the former Yugoslavia for 3 months and my brain was screaming out for excitement, for stimulation, for something extraordinary to happen. Does that sound familiar? You are single, you are living in a rented flat, you have not found it easy to make friends in the town. Most of your colleagues in the station are a bit old for you. I'm sure that young PC, Mark, has asked you out, but there's no way he could handle a South London girl, so you had to say no. You both still find it awkward. That poor boy. Your pride won't allow you to go back to the Met for a good while and so you're stuck here for the time being. You're still the new girl, so promotion is a pretty distant prospect, added to the fact you're not all that popular because, deep down, everyone can tell you've made a mistake and you resent being here. You can't even quit. Why throw away these years on the force, the tough years, just because of a wrong turn? So you strap on the uniform and you turn up, shift after shift, teeth gritted, just waiting for something extraordinary to happen. Like, perhaps, a woman who isn't a nun, pretending her bag has been stolen. Elizabeth raises an eyebrow at Donna, looking for a response. Donna is utterly impassive, utterly unimpressed. I'm still waiting for the question, Elizabeth. Elizabeth nods, and opens her notebook again. My question is this. Wouldn't you like to be investigating the Tony Curran murder? There is silence as Donna slowly weaves her hands together and rests her chin on them. She considers Elizabeth very carefully before speaking. There is already a team investigating the Tony Curran murder, Elizabeth. A highly qualified murder squad. I recently delivered tea to it. They don't really have a vacancy for a PC who tuts every time she gets asked to do the photocopying. Have you ever thought it's possible you don't really understand how the police works? Elizabeth notes this down and talks as she writes. That is possible. How complicated it all must be. But a lot of fun, I imagine. I imagine too, agrees Donna. They say he was bludgeoned, says Elizabeth. With a large spanner. Could you confirm that? No comment, Elizabeth, says Donna. Elizabeth stops writing and looks up again. Wouldn't you like to be part of it, Donna? Donna starts to drum her fingers on the desk. Okay. Let's just suppose I would like to be involved in the murder investigation. Yes, quite, let's suppose that. Let's start there and see where we get to. You do understand how SID works, Elizabeth. I can't simply ask to be assigned to a particular investigation. Elizabeth smiles. Oh goodness, don't you worry about that, Donna, we can take care of it all. You can take care of it? I should have thought so, yes. How, asks Donna. Well, there's always a way, isn't there? But you would be interested? If we could make it happen. Donna looks back to the heavy door, safely shut. When could you make that happen, Elizabeth? Elizabeth looks at her watch and gives a small shrug. An hour, perhaps. And this conversation never leaves this room. Elizabeth puts a finger to her lips. Then I would. Yes, please. Donna holds up her hands, open and honest. I would really like to chase murderers. Elizabeth smiles and puts her notebook back in her pocket. Well, this is smashing. I thought I had read the situation correctly. What's in it for you, asks Donna. Nothing, other than a favor to a new friend. And we might have the odd question here or there, about the investigation. Just to satisfy our curiosity. You know I couldn't tell you anything confidential? That's not a deal I can agree to. Nothing unprofessional, I promise you. Elizabeth crosses herself. As a woman of God. And in an hour you say. Elizabeth looks at her watch. I'd say about an hour. Depending on the traffic. Donna nods, as if this makes complete sense. About your little speech, though, Elizabeth. I don't know if it was designed to impress me, or to show off in front of Joyce, but it was pretty obvious stuff. Elizabeth concedes the point. Obvious, but right, dear. Almost right, but you're not quite, Miss Marple. Is she, Joyce? Joyce pipes up. Oh yes, that boy Mark is gay, Elizabeth. You'd have to be fairly blind to miss that. Donna smiles. Lucky you have your friend with you, sister. She likes that Elizabeth is attempting to hide a smile of her own. I'll need your mobile number, by the way, Donna, says Elizabeth. I don't really want to fake a crime every time I need to see you. Donna slides a card over the table. I hope that's a personal number and not an official one, says Elizabeth. It would be nice to have some privacy. Donna looks at Elizabeth, shakes her head and sighs. She writes down another number on the card. Lovely, says Elizabeth. I suspect between us we can find whoever killed Tony Curran. It can't be beyond the wit of man. Or rather woman. Donna stands. Should I ask how you can get me on the investigating team, Elizabeth, or don't I want to know? Elizabeth checks her watch. Nothing you need to concern yourself with. Ron and Ibrahim should be taking care of it about now. Joyce waits for Elizabeth to stand too, then leans into the tape recorder once again. Interview terminated, 12:47 p.m. Chapter 19. DCI Chris Hudson swings his Ford Focus onto the long, broad driveway leading up to Cooper's Chase. The traffic hasn't been at all bad and he is hoping this won't take too long. As he checks out his surroundings, Chris wonders why this place needs quite so many llamas. There are no spaces in the visitor's car park, so he eases the Focus onto a verge and steps out into the Kent sun. Chris has been to retirement communities before and this is not at all what he had been expecting. This is a whole village. He wanders past a bowls match, wine chilling in coolers at each end. One of the players is an extremely elderly woman smoking a pipe. He follows a meandering path through a perfect English garden, flanked by 3 stories of flats. There are people gossiping on patios and balconies, enjoying the sunshine. Friends sit on benches, bees buzz round bushes, light breezes play tunes with ice cubes. Chris finds the whole thing deeply infuriating. He's a wind and rain guy, a turn-up-the-collar-on-your overcoat man. If Chris had his way he would hibernate for the summer. He has not worn shorts since 1987. Chris crosses a resident's car park, past a red postbox looking picture book perfect, annoying him further, and finds Wordsworth Court. He rings the buzzer for flat 11, Mr. Ibrahim Arif. After being buzzed up and walking across a lushly carpeted hallway and up a lushly carpeted staircase and knocking on a solid oak door, Chris finds himself in that flat of Ibrahim Arif, sitting opposite the man himself and also opposite Ron Ritchie. Ron Ritchie. Well, wasn't that quite the thing? Chris had been taken aback the moment they had been introduced. The father of a man Chris was investigating, what was that? Luck? Something more sinister? Chris decides he will just let it play out. He trusts that, if there is an angle, he will spot it. Strange that this is where Red Ron ended up, though. The scourge of the bosses, the beast of British Leland, and British Steel, and British whatever else you'd care to mention? Amidst the honeysuckle and oddities of Cooper's Chase? Chris would have barely recognized him, to be honest. Ron Ritchie is wearing mismatched pajamas, an unzipped tracksuit top and dress shoes. He is looking around vacantly, mouth open. He is a mess and Chris feels awkward, as if he is imposing on a private scene. Ibrahim is explaining the situation to DCI Chris Hudson. It can be very stressful for elderly people to talk to police officers. You mustn't think that's your fault. This is why I suggested you conduct the interview here. Chris nods gently, because he has done the training. I can assure you that Mr. Ritchie is not in trouble, but if, as you say, he has information, I will need to ask him a couple of questions. Ibrahim turns to Ron. Ron, he just wants to ask you about the argument you saw. Remember, we talked about it? Ibrahim looks back to Chris. He forgets things. He's very old, Detective Chief Inspector. A very, very old man. All right, Ibrahim, says Ron. Ibrahim pats Ron's hand and speaks to him slowly. I think it's quite safe, Ron. We've seen this gentleman's warrant card. I rang the number on it, then I googled him. Remember? I just don't think I can, says Ron. I don't want to get into any trouble. There won't be any trouble, Mr. Ritchie, says Chris. I guarantee it. It's just that you might have important information. Red Ron is a shadow of his former self and Chris is very aware that he must play this carefully. Certainly don't mention Jason yet. The possibility of a pub lunch is also rapidly vanishing. Mr. Arif is right, you can tell me anything. Ron looks at Chris, then back to Ibrahim for signs of reassurance. Ibrahim squeezes his friend's arm and Ron looks at Chris again, then leans forward. I think I'd be happier talking to the lady. Chris is taking his first sip of the mint tea Ibrahim has made for him. The lady. He looks at Ron and then at Ibrahim. Ibrahim helps him out. Which lady, Ron? The lady, IB. The one who comes and talks to us. The woman copper. Oh yes, says Ibrahim. PC de Freitas. She often comes to talk to us, Detective Chief Inspector. Window locks. Do you know her? Of course. Yes, she is one of my team. Chris is trying to remember if the young PC with the non-existent shoelaces was Donna de Freitas. He was fairly sure she was. She'd come from the Met and no one knew why. We work very closely together. So she is part of the investigation? This is excellent news. Ibrahim beams. We love PC de Freitas here. Well, she's not officially part of the investigation team, Mr. Arif, says Chris. She's on other important duties. Catching criminals and so on. Ron and Ibrahim don't say a word, they just look expectantly at Chris. But it is a terrific idea. I would love her to be on the team, says Chris, trying to work out who he would need to speak to. Surely someone owed him a favor? She is a fine officer, says Ibrahim. She does you credit. Ibrahim becomes serious again and turns to Ron. So, if the handsome detective here and our friend PC de Freitas came to talk to you together? Would you be happy, Ron? Ron takes his first sip of tea. That'd be perfect, I'd like that. I'll talk to Jason too. Jason, asks Chris, on alert. Do you like boxing, son? Asks Ron. Chris nods. Very much, Mr. Ritchie. My boy is a boxer. Jason. I know, sir, says Chris. You must be very proud. Only, he was with me, so he should be here. He saw the row too. Chris nods. Well, that was very interesting. The trip has not been wasted. Well, I'm sure I can come back and talk to you both. And you'll bring PC de Freitas with you? How wonderful, says Ibrahim. Of course, says Chris. Whatever gets us to the truth. Chapter 20. Joyce. So it seems we are investigating a murder. And, better still, I have been in a police interview room. This diary is bringing me luck. It was interesting watching Elizabeth in action. She is very impressive. Very calm. I wonder if we would have got along if we'd met 30 years ago? Probably not, we are from different worlds. But this place brings people together. I do hope I'll be of some help to Elizabeth in the investigation. Help to catch Tony Curran's killer. Perhaps I will, in my own way. I think that if I have a special skill, it is that I am often overlooked. Is that the word? Underestimated perhaps? Cooper's Chase is full of the great and the good, people who have done something or other with their lives. It's really a lot of fun. There's someone who helped design the Channel Tunnel, someone who has a disease named after them, and someone who was the ambassador to Paraguay or Uruguay. You know the type. And me? Joyce Meadowcroft? What do they make of me, I wonder? Harmless, certainly. Chatty. Guilty, I'm afraid. But I think they know, deep down, that I'm not one of them. A nurse, not a doctor, not that anyone would say that to my face. They know that Joanna bought my flat here. Joanna is one of them. Me, not so much. And yet, if there's a row at catering committee, or if there's a problem with the lake pumps, or if, as happened very recently, one resident's dog impregnates another and all hell breaks loose, then who is there to fix it? Joyce Meadowcroft. I am very happy to listen to the grandstanding, watch the chests puffing out, hear the furious threats of legal action and wait for them to blow themselves out. Then I step in and suggest that maybe there's a way through, and perhaps there is a compromise to be reached, and perhaps dogs will be dogs. Nobody here feels threatened by me, nobody sees me as a rival, I'm just Joyce, gentle, chatty Joyce, always has her nose in everything. So everyone calms down through me. Quiet, sensible, Joyce. there is no more shouting and the problem is fixed, more often than not in a way that advantages me. Which is something no one ever seems to notice. So I am very happy to be overlooked and always have been. And I do think perhaps that will be helpful in this investigation. Everyone can look at Elizabeth and I'll just get on with being me. The Meadowcroft, by the way, is from my late husband, Gary, and I have always liked it. I had many reasons to marry Gary and his surname was another to add to a long list. A friend of mine from nursing married a Bumstead. Barbara Bumstead. I think I might have found an excuse and called it off. What a day. I think I'll watch an old Prime Suspect and then bed. Whatever Elizabeth needs me to do next, I'll be ready. End of chapter 1 to 20 of Mystery Club or other title The Thursday Murder Club. To listen full and free chapter 21 to more of Mystery Club or other title The Thursday Murder Club, please access website, detectiveaudiobook.com and search keyword, Mystery Club or click the link in the descriptions in this video.